All right, what's going on, guys? So tonight we're going to take a deep dive into breaking down Femdom masochism and Femdom suffering, and then also tying in a lot of resistance and how you can use whatever you feel like you have a lot of resistance to kind of almost point you as a compass towards what you should actually be doing. And so the more fear that you have towards doing something, or the more you just get that anxiety or that uncomfortable feeling, is exactly what you should be doing. And I'm rereading The War of Art by Steven Pressfield, and that's really what the whole book is about resistance, and how whatever you're most resistant to is in fact what you really should be doing in your life. But first, tying back more into, and I'm going to put the camera down here in a second, just film this little intro. To start, I want to really tie in this idea of a lot of us who have been through a Femdom addiction or are still addicted to Femdom. I think we almost have this like noble idea in the back of our mind, like, oh, like I could be successful in life if I just wasn't addicted to Femdom. And so again, you're putting yourself into that victim mentality, and you're putting yourself into really just a dumbed down state where it's like you're just saying, well, I could do that if I wasn't addicted to this. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is that being a masochist in many ways is not a bad thing. And so when you look at Femdom, right, if it's Femdom, like financial domination, if it's ball busting, if it's humiliation, whatever it is, you're basically being a masochist in the sense that you're doing this to yourself, right? I mean, you can call yourself a slave, or you can call yourself a sub, or whatever you want to call it, but at the end of the day, you are doing it to yourself. And I know it's one of the crazy things and the most aggravating things about a Femdom addiction is you feel like it's like, why am I doing this to myself? Because you're repeatedly, time and time again, punching yourself down and keeping yourself down. And I've been there 100 times. I mean, I probably had over 100 times I said I was going to stop, and then a day later or a week later or a month later, I'd be right back at it, and it was just that endless cycle. But what I really want to talk about tonight as well is I kind of had this recollection today and in the past couple days, and I've thought about these things before, but the idea of how being a masochist can really work in your favor. So take the example of working out in the gym. If you want to get really strong, you want to get really muscular, you want to make a lot of improvements in the gym or any sort of exercise, you have to be a masochist in the sense that you want to have to hurt yourself, right? Because it's painful hitting the weights hard, building a lot of strength, building a lot of endurance, or whatever it is that you're looking to build, right? That's hard. And there's so many other areas in your life where it's like it actually is beneficial to break yourself down, right? To want to break your face, to be like, I'm gonna read so much that my brain hurts, I'm gonna learn so much that my brain hurts, I'm gonna, again, beat my muscles up so much that they grow huge, right? And so in many ways, I think it's a very masculine trait to want to break yourself down to build yourself up, and it's that whole masochistic mentality. But the problem with Femdom or any sort of negative addiction is that you are funneling this masochistic tendency into just the wrong thing. And the key is you don't necessarily have to change that sense of masochism that you have with yourself. You can actually keep it there. You just want to funnel it into something that's productive, right? Something that is going to push you upward instead of holding you down. And really, to stay in a Femdom addiction is just to stay asleep and really not live up to your potential at all. So that's what tonight's video is going to be. I'm going to put the camera down so we can stabilize it here a little bit. So it's going to be about masochism and suffering, and then how whatever you're the most resistant to is what you really should push towards. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. All right, so the first topic is going to be suffering. That's what I want to talk about here. And I'm going to try to break it down based around what I've seen with my own experience, as well as working with other guys. But very much, I think this feeling of suffering, let me actually first start by saying that when it comes to a femdom addiction, you might feel like you're getting some sort of payout by staying addicted to it. Like, it might feel good on the front end. You hear me talk about this a lot. It's the +1 on the front end, -10 on the back end. It's that way with every addiction. It's that quick gratification, but then it sucks you dry on the back end. So you feel like you're getting some sort of payoff, but realize you're really not. So why do you keep on suffering? Why do you keep on choosing to stay in a femdom addiction where you clearly are miserable and suffering? And the first thing I'll say is that you don't have to inflict any more suffering on your life than you really need to, because inevitably there's going to be a lot of suffering in life. Now, of course, it all depends on how your perspective is on things. Now, like, let's say that the death of a close friend or family member, you can condition yourself. No matter what, you're going to have to go through a mourning period, but you won't have to necessarily suffer if you have a good outlook on life. You are grounded. You can kind of look at life as, almost everything, even the hardships, as a learning experience or offering some sort of value. But that's not really the point of this video. The point is, why do we keep on suffering when it comes to femdom addiction? And in many ways, it's funny, because I was just thinking about this. On the one hand, suffering is a really noble quality. The ability to be kind of stoical and to keep on pushing even though you're suffering is a very noble quality. And I think, of course, that depends on what you're applying it to. Now, in the case of a femdom addiction, it's kind of really stupid, because you're inflicting all this pain on yourself. That inevitably is going to inflict pain on other people, because while you might not be directly harming other people, remember that you're not living up to your potential as a man. And there's so many people in your life, friends, family members, like I said, it can even be a cat or a dog, that you could offer them, that person, that animal, so much more of your full potential. So by you continuing to keep yourself in this suffering, not only is it victim mind state, remember, there's no one that's going to take you out of this other than yourself, right? So all of my courses and training and coaching when it comes to femdom is that idea that you have to reclaim your power and realize that, yeah, you're suffering, but you're also the person, the only individual that's keeping you in that suffering. And remember that suffering can always lead to kind of better understanding of yourself, but at the same time, once you've stayed in femdom long enough, it's like, all right, you've suffered enough, you've experienced that, you know what that addiction is like. And so that kind of brings it to this idea of masochism. And I think it's why a lot of us, that have dealt with femdom addictions or are still addicted to femdom stay in it, is because we have a very masochistic kind of tendency. And so masochism basically just means that you kind of get off on hurting yourself, right? You kind of enjoy pain. You kind of enjoy inflicting pain on yourself is really what masochistic means. And so you can see how that would directly apply to a femdom addict. It's like they enjoy breaking themselves down, and they repeatedly do it because they get some sort of weird, kind of perverse pleasure out of doing it. And so what my argument really is that you can work to change it so that you're not a masochist anymore. But I would actually say that that would require a lot more work and would actually probably not be as beneficial in the long run, because I think that having the ability to be a masochist as well as having the ability to suffer are really masculine in many ways, and I'll explain why. And I think that they're really beneficial in many ways. And so I just think that a lot of these qualities in life that you already have are great. You've just funneled it into the wrong type of behavior or this addiction, and in this case you've funneled it into Femdom. And there's so many other reasons why you likely have been trapped in this Femdom addiction, which I talk about in lots of other videos, but tonight I really want to keep it on topic with this idea of masochism and then suffering. And so the point is that a lot of these, being a masochist is not necessarily a bad thing, right? If you want to, and from my own experience, what I did is I've done tons of things that are masochistic in my life, and after I got out of Femdom addiction for a while, I got really big into bodybuilding. I was just pounding, hundreds of pounds, hundreds and hundreds of pounds, deadlifts and squats and bench presses and overhead presses, and just thousands and thousands of repetitions in the gym. And I'm a lot smaller now, but I used to be goddamn humongous, and it was just that literally I was obsessed with just breaking myself down, that pain of being in the gym, but it feels really good. It's hard to explain, right? I mean, I think a lot of us have that. I think most Femdom addicts probably do have that, and you kind of understand where I'm coming from. But the point is, this is not bad. You just got to pick something else other than Femdom, right? Get into, you don't have to do weightlifting, but that's a great one. And that's really good for guys, because not only does that boost your confidence as you get stronger and more muscular, but it gives you more energy. Like I said, it gives you more confidence. It is able to burn off a lot of that steam. It's one of the big problems, I think, in our society now, is that as guys, we're told to kind of sit down, shut up, play video games, jerk off, don't make too much noise, don't really try to do anything or piss anybody off. And it's like, we think about that energy that you had when you were like a little kid. Like you still have that as a grown man. You've got to find some way to burn that energy off. And so going into the gym, whatever it is that you choose, some sort of sport, some sort of weightlifting, whatever it is, could be running, something that can burn off that aggression, that sense of competition, of achievement, I think is something that's really important. But as I was saying too, I think I said it in the intro, the masochism could also be like reading so much that your brain hurts, or anything where it's like pushing you in that productive way. I always talk about the upward spiral. Anything that's masochistic but in an upward spiral way is really something that you can get into, right? It's always just, is it benefiting you, right? You always have to ask yourself that question with anything that you're doing in your life, right? Like a basic pros and cons list. I know it's kind of a stupid, or not stupid, it's actually a really practical way to decide if something is good or not, right? Make a pro and con list. What are the pros? What are the cons? If there's more pros, it's probably good. If there's a lot of cons and not very many pros, you probably want to cut it out of your life. But I also then kind of want to segue here into the idea of whatever you feel most resistant to is really what you should be pursuing. And so I always knew, man, like when I was in Femdom, I was miserable. And you'll know, because the second you come, you're like, wow, what the fuck did I just do? I'm never doing that again. I'm sure you guys say that every time. I used to say it every single time. What was I thinking? What did I just do? And then of course, you go through that refractory period where you're clear-headed, and then of course you start to get horny and you slip back right in again. And so this idea that whatever you're most kind of resistant towards is really what you should be pushing to do. And I knew for years, I was like, man, I'm gonna really have to work on this Femdom addiction, because it went through waves with me where it would be bad, then it wouldn't be so bad, then it would get really bad, then it wouldn't be so bad, then it would get really, really bad. And it was continuing to get worse over time. And I knew, I was like, eventually, man, I'm gonna really have to work on this. And it's going to take time. If you really seriously want to get rid of this, it's going to take work, but because you know that you're resistant to doing that work, that's exactly what you should be doing. And yeah, you could make the argument that you could just stay in a Femdom addiction. I always say that, okay, if you are only doing it like a few hours per week, maybe there's an argument that you could just stay in it and not really be affected all that much. But my argument from what I've seen is that Femdom addiction is almost always a degenerative condition, meaning that it's not going to just stabilize. If you're watching 30 minutes per day, and I've talked to a lot of guys that are like in their early 20s and they watch like 20 minutes per day, it's like by the time you're 25, if you don't work on this, you're not going to be watching 20 minutes per day. You're going to be doing it like 2 hours per day. And if you know, by the time you're 30, if you haven't worked on it, you're going to be watching 5 hours per day. Like, it's just going to get, and then that's where you see those guys that like are like those like lifelong subs when they're like 60 years old and they like just do these like cash feeds and stuff like that. It's like you don't want to ever come anywhere close to that, because you basically just ruined your life at that point. It's like you had all this potential, you didn't wake up. And I look at that with everybody that's like an addict. Like, I have a guy that lives downstairs below me, kind of drives me insane. He's a good guy, but he's like a hardcore alcoholic, smokes weed, smokes cigarettes. He's like 62, I think, years old. And it's like, dude, how have you not woken up in the 62 years that you've been on this life, on this planet, alive? How have you not at some point been like, yo, I want to change. I'm not living up to my potential. I want to live a better life. I want to help more people around me. I want to do more things in my life. And it's like, at that point, it's just sad. Like, dude, you're in your 60s. He'll probably die pretty soon. He's super unhealthy. It's like, you just think about all that wasted potential. And I could never go out like that. It's like, man, I'm going to fight as hard as I can. Yeah, of course, I'm going to have the periods where I mess up. I've had a bunch of them. But I'm always going to get back on the horse. And you have to have that same mentality, realizing that it's going to be hard to beat it. You want to beat it. And, you know, that's just the way that it's going to be. It's what separates the winners from the losers. It's what separates the guys that are successful, right? Are you willing to fight? Are you willing to put in the work? Because there's really no other way to do it. You know, staying in a Femdom addiction is easy. I mean, you can make the argument that it's kind of hard in the sense that you're going to go through a lot of suffering. You're going to stay in that, and you're just going to spend the rest of your life in a derp state, suffering, not living up to your potential, having low energy, being depressed. And you know, it's crazy how many guys are willing to stay in that. And it's like, at a certain point, you have to wake up, and oftentimes it takes hitting rock bottom before that happens, you know, whether it's, you know, financially or physically, mentally. But, you know, what I can say is that once you hit that rock bottom, because that's what it takes for a lot of guys, use that to springboard yourself up. And I used to even do that when I would have a minor relapse. Every single time I would come out of a minor relapse, and I was actually talking about, this is one of the guys in the Valhalla Syndicate the other night, was that every single time I would hit a minor little relapse, it wasn't like I was hitting rock bottom, but I wasn't happy with like what I had done, or I had jerked off too much, or whatever it was. Every single time that would happen, the next few days or even few weeks after, I would have this like surge of energy. Like, I'm like motivated, ready to go. And those surges, when you come out of a relapse, are also really powerful to capitalize on. Be like, I don't know if I'm, you know, I don't think this energy is going to stay. You know, it can't stay that way for forever, but it's like, I'm trying to milk this kind of post-relapse energy surge as long as I can. That's something that's also interesting, and you kind of get better at. And that's something I got really good at for several years, because like, I was like, damn, man, I can't beat this. So I need to get really good at the periods when I'm not watching Femdom. I have to make those really, really productive. And I got really, really good at it. So as I was saying, for me, it was always like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And those 2 weeks when I was off of Femdom, I was like highly productive, getting tons of stuff done, because I knew, I was like, I know I'm going to be going back into this like Femdom depression. And for me, it was very much like, almost like, I don't know if I'm like, I probably would have been clinically diagnosed as bipolar, because that's exactly what it was. I would go through these periods of extreme motivation, getting a ton of work done, feeling really good, not having any anxiety, and then the second it was like a light switch would go off, and then I would be back into Femdom addiction, and it would be massive depression, massive anxiety. As I've said before, when I was off Femdom, eating healthy, exercising, on Femdom, eating junk food, not exercising, not reading, and so it was just like literally night and day. And that's a whole nother interesting topic, this idea of dualism, how, you know, everyone has that light, the dark, or whatever you want to call it, the good, the evil, but we all possess this because it's dualistic. But the thing with dualism is that, in my opinion, it doesn't have to be 50-50 when it comes to this stuff. It can be like 90-10, and even the part that's like that 10% that has to be a little bit of that dualistic component, it doesn't have to be Femdom. It could be something where you watch a movie or something, like where you have like some sort of like kind of rest or recovery period where you're doing something that's maybe like a little bit like mental masturbation, but doesn't have to be something that's highly destructive. And so it's really trying to get this understanding of, why do you continue to beat yourself up, and realizing that tendency, in my opinion, the masochistic tendency, is not bad. You just have to start funneling it into something that's productive, into that upward spiral, and it's going to better your life instead of hurting your life. And realizing that the suffering, you can try to point the finger at other people, and as I always say, you got to point the finger at yourself with everything in life. Even if it was someone else's fault, I'm always pointing it at myself and saying, I'm going to use this as motivation to do better. I'm going to use this as a learning experience. I'm going to use this to grow, to progress. And that's just the way that you have to look at it. Otherwise, you'll drive yourself crazy, and you will very much be in a victim mentality mind state. And you really can't grow. It's the complete opposite of a growth mindset, being in a victim mentality mindset. And it's how a lot of people live their life. So that's one of the huge keys, realizing that always point the finger at yourself, say, you know what, it's time for me to man up. It's time for me to really start working on myself, to really take this into my own hands. And believe me, when you do that, again, you take the power, you put the ball in your hands, and you realize that you will have the control over your life, right? You're the own creator of your life, and it's an incredibly powerful thing to wake up to, realizing that, you know, especially with the Femdom addiction, that, you know, that voice, that really reclaiming your power, saying, I have control, I have the ability to affect change, I have the ability to choose what I want to do in my life. And you know, for so long, for me, with Femdom, it was very much like I felt like I had no control. Like, oh, I'm relapsing, there's nothing I can do. And when you start to really realize that you have control over the Femdom, you know, that you can choose if you want to watch it, if you don't want to watch it. And if you do choose to watch it, doesn't mean you're a bad person. But even if you can just reduce it, and I always say that a lot of other Femdom videos I made, what if you could just reduce the consumption by 1% per week? 1% per week doesn't seem like a lot, but if you did that for a year, that'd be a 50% reduction. If you did that again for the next year, then you'd be completely off of it. Now that would take you 2 years, but then you'd be completely off it. I think you can do it in way less. One more thing that I want to talk about that I heard in a video recently is the rule of threes. And this really does apply, because I beat a lot of other addictions. The rule of threes essentially says that you want to look at beating the addiction first with going 3 days without doing it, right? That's phase one, stage one, step one. 3 days. The next step is being able to go 3 weeks. That's the one that most people can't do. I think almost anyone could go 3 days without watching Femdom if you really had to. Okay, you complete that. Now looking for 3 weeks. And if you can go the 3 weeks, what I found when I was first trying to stop doing Femdom is I could do 3 days very easily, and there was almost impossible for me to do 3 weeks. But eventually, you get to 3 weeks. All right, that's stage 2, and then stage 3 is trying to go 3 months. And so if you can eventually go 3 months, you've basically gone the point, like almost neurologically, where you've kind of retrained your brain. And I don't mean 3 months where like you're watching a little bit here and there. I mean 3 months, 0, like none. And what you'll realize, and what I realized when I was eventually able to get to that like several month mark, is that when you're very much just a few days without it, you still have these negative loops that are always going on in your head. Like, oh, like for me, like I would always be thinking, this sounds like crazy, but I would always be thinking about a girl kicking a guy in the balls. I don't know why, but I would just always be looping on that. And then as I got another day, another week out without watching any content, 0. Remember, you got to go completely off of it. I just would have less of those thoughts. I would have less of that negative talk. And then every day, it's like you'd feel it dissipating a little bit more. And it's like you're literally, it's almost like it's like a virus that you have in your brain, in your body, in your mind, and you're like starving it. And you want to starve that shit. You want it to end up withering away and dying and killing it. And it's like every extra day that you can put in between that addiction without doing it at all, it's like it loses and it shrinks. That Femdom virus shrinks. You have less, negative talk, less depression, less anxiety, all these things. It's like withering it away. And eventually the goal is that if you can hit those 3 months, you basically rebuilt yourself to where you're not going to have that addiction. It's not going to hold that charge. But of course, you're never going to get rid of the history in your past that you've done it. So the guy that was talking about this was like, you'd be completely set free. And I largely agree. I also know that you'll keep that kind of fear and the suffering with you for the rest of your life. It's one of the reasons why I always say, this is not to be like depressive or anything, but it's one of the reasons why I always say, if you're a young guy, like really you want to get this handled and get out of it now, because the longer you stay in, you can't ever get that time back. And so while if you can go 3 months, it probably means ultimately that you can really beat it. There's always going to be that risk of, and it's the same way with any like a drug addict or an alcoholic. It's like, even when they beat it, some of them might never think about it again. They might be done, but a lot of them are going to battle with that kind of temptation the rest of their life. And a lot of them may end up relapsing at a certain point. But the key is too, if you have the ability to go 3 months, is that if you relapse, you now know you can just go back to the 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. And so like you have that tool in your toolkit, and it'll be much easier, because once you've broken through, like if you've never gone 3 weeks, it might seem really hard. If you've never gone 3 months, it would seem damn near impossible. Once you've gone that amount of time, it's like now you have that reference point. You know how to do it. You know it's possible. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be hard to do it again, but you know how to get there. And so likely, even if you do mess up a little bit, it'll be much easier to get back to that 3 months of sobriety, or the 6 months, or the year, or whatever it is that you're shooting for, because you've done it before. So that's really kind of what I wanted to tie in tonight. And I'll finally just wrap by saying the book that I'm rereading, The War of Art, is really great, because it really just gives you that motivation to push towards whatever you feel resistant towards. And so whatever you feel afraid of, whatever you feel fearful of. And like, I think so many of us, like we always know, like I said at the beginning, that this is something like Femdom addiction that I need to work on. Like, you have that voice in the back of your head being like, man, I shouldn't do this. This is a bad idea. I know I'm going to feel terrible. I know I'm wasting my time. I know I'm not living up to my potential. I know that I'm not doing what I should be doing. I know I need to work on this. Yet you stay in that dirt state. You stay in that Femdom addiction because it's honestly easier to stay in it. And so you gotta always make it really hard. You gotta make it so you're getting anxiety when you stay in that addiction, so that you have to push towards that fear of actually working on yourself, right? Of actually changing yourself. And so always realize that whatever you're uncomfortable with is exactly what you should push into. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever you're fearful of, is exactly what you should push into. And of course, that's what probably about 1% of the population really does, because so much of humans and just any animal in general, if they feel comfortable, they feel safe, they want to stay in their nice little derp safe space, eat another donut, smoke some more weed, play some more video games, watch more Femdom, watch more porn. So your body, your base low-level amygdala, reptilian brain wants you to do, because it wants to just keep you in that path of least resistance. So read The War of Art. That book is great. It's a pretty short read. That book is really good. I would just classify it as like a really good personal development book. It's just really, it'll give you a lot of motivation. And so that's on my reading list. But other than that, I just want to say that you have the power to do it. Realize that the suffering, in order to end it, you have to be the one to always point the finger at yourself. And I encourage you to hop into that House Syndicate. I've been posting a lot of resources in there, little ideas, things that I'm thinking about, dialogues with other guys that are working on the same things that I've been successful with at beating, showing them how to do the same things. And then hop into the courses, hop into Femdom, the 7-day Annihilator Challenge. Got tons of cool bonuses and missions, resources in there. That's a great first starter. Again, that'll walk you through a complete immersive 7-day experience. We'll walk you through a lot of what I think are the most important phases to get through with the Femdom addiction. And then if you want a full month accountability course, go to Femdom Destroyer or work with me one-on-one, and we can get it handled extremely quickly. And that's it. You have to be the one that takes action, takes responsibility. You know this is something that you should be doing. I knew it was something that I should have been doing for years, and I kept on putting it off until I basically hit rock bottom. And sadly, that's what it takes, I think, for a lot of guys with addictions, is to finally hit that point where it's like, dude, I'm gonna like die or like go bankrupt, or I just can't live my life anymore like this. And so while that might be the case, I also think that a lot of guys, you can get you to, wake up now, start changing now, start working on yourself now, point the finger at yourself, realize that I actually think it's very masculine to be stoical, to be a masochist, but you got to funnel it into something productive instead of something destructive, right? Choose life instead of choosing death. Femdom is ultimately putting yourself to sleep and moving on a speed train right towards death. So wake up, choose life, point the finger at yourself, take action, and remember, what you feel uncomfortable doing is always what you should be pushing into. And I really urge you to hop into Valhalla Syndicate, trying to build a really strong, solid group of guys in there. I think we've got about 40 members in there right now. Would love to get that up to 100 members. I think that'd be super badass. And I post lots of stuff in there, just make a really tight-knit group, and then hop into the courses and we'll get this stuff banged out. I love all you guys. We'll talk very soon. Hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know what some other stuff you want me to talk about is. Anyway, you're gonna do it. Point the finger at yourself. Talk very, very soon. I'm out.